Hi, I'm Dan Prevette. I'm the writer and performer of Missionary Positions, a solo show. If you want to learn a little bit more about it, watch the rest of this interview. I think I first fell in love with theater a little bit late in the game, to be honest. I mean, I feel like a lot of people who get into theater start from a very young age or even in high school. I didn't get into theater until I was in college. And a part of that was because of my upbringing, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a bit. But I went to a very, very small, insulated, tiny high school. We had no theater program, no live productions or performances of any kind. So when I was in high school, what I first fell in love with was stand-up. Stand-up comedy was an accessible stylistic medium that seemed innately approachable. Like it seemed there was something, call it the naivete of youth. There was something about watching a stand-up where something in my young mind was like, I could do that. It wasn't like a movie. Like I was a kid who loved movies, loved storytelling, but movies were clearly expensive and inaccessible. But stand-up was akin to what I saw people doing fairly regularly. So when I got to college, I knew at that point, 18, 19, I already had this desire of, I want to get on stage and I think I would like to try to do a play. There was something as a movie lover, I knew that even though I had very little knowledge or experience around theater, I knew that plays were, for lack of a better term, the playground for actors. I knew that that was where most actors began. So when I was in college, I auditioned my freshman year for a number of productions. I did not make any of them, which at the time really, really hurt my heart. But in hindsight, is probably the best decision. I had no idea what I was doing. And my the first play that I was in when I was 19, I think I was a sophomore. I played Lenny in Of Mice and Men. So I'm a very big man. I'm 6'7", and I like kind of I'm somewhere in the 270 to 280 category. I'm very physically large. So I was lucky in that only a very specific size person can really effectively play Lenny in Of Mice and Men. I think that was a very easy approach. But I was also really taken with the fact that it seemed like Steinbeck had very carefully written a character that was not made to be played as a caricature, but was made to be played in a very innocent, childlike way. And I think as a big man, there was something about that just seemed like a really fun opportunity to play very starkly against type. And I think I was just in the right place at the right time at a small college. So I was, a physically big fish in a metaphorically small pond. When did I fall in love with writing? I originally, I struggled a lot as a student in school when I was especially young. I had a really, really hard time focusing. Now it's really quite popular to be neurodivergent or to be diagnosed with late stage ADHD. I don't want to say popular, but it's at least in the conversation. It's talked about in a way that it didn't used to be. I'm 34. So when I was in school, I think the only people who were given formal diagnoses were the furthest end of any kind of neurodivergent spectrum. I was not far enough at the end of that spectrum to be diagnosed, but I struggled enough with neurodivergence that I couldn't focus in class. I couldn't focus on assignments. I had a very, very hard time with any sort of analytical work, which most of elementary and middle school is. I couldn't do math. I couldn't do science. And I really struggled in English because English was mostly at that time the study of grammar, figuring out how to write properly. And I just could not wrap my head around it. And it wasn't until I was in sixth grade and I took a drama class in my middle school. And it was my drama teacher, Miss Caruth, who I've since reached out to as an adult. And Miss Caruth was the first teacher I had who said, you're actually pretty good at writing. You should keep doing this. And I think I said, I'm really bad at English. And she said, well, I didn't say English. I said writing. And I think that's the kind of magical work that a teacher can do to really kind of spark something in a student, because I had no idea that there was a difference. And as soon as somebody told me, you're pretty good at writing, that became the way that I got myself through everything in school. I was never going to be a good math student, but I could average out my grade point average by being an effective writer. So I think I learned that I had a knack for words, certainly in high school. When it became an obsession, though, was probably in college when I really, really fell in love. I went to school and I actually studied filmmaking. So I studied directing and screenwriting. And I fell in love with writing scripts. And then when I moved to Los Angeles, that continued as I started doing live comedy and live performance. Obviously, writing was a big part of that. But to be perfectly honest, I think for a long time, I misdiagnosed myself as an actor. I think that I incorrectly believed that I was an actor through and through. I was a performer. I could be given a script and I could do something unique with it. I could get on stage and I could perform comedy. But there was something about being a writer that seemed like I wasn't special enough or I wasn't talented enough. And unfortunately, I think I held on to that belief for far too long. I had no idea you could really just decide that you were a writer as soon as you started writing. That came much later. I floundered in that delusion of, well, I like write sometimes, but I'm not a real writer for most of my 20s. Really, it was as I started exploring solo theater, which I think was the perfect combination of my time on stage doing comedy, my passion for film, which very naturally led to sort of multimedia expression, and the fact that I did love doing stage work. I loved being on stage when I was doing plays in college. These all kind of like came together in like, oh, solo theater is the perfect cocktail of everything that I love. And at its core is I have to express my story through writing. And it was the first time that I genuinely fell in love with the idea of being a writer first and foremost, being a writer before I was an actor, being a writer before I was a performer. And I would say that now I certainly consider myself a writer more than I consider myself an actor. And I would generally choose to write. I really don't I don't audition for commercials or anything anymore. But I do work as a writer. So it is absolutely an obsession at this point. I think the theater experience is unique and important because it's uniquely human in a way that actually transcends most of modern conventional entertainment. So we have only had movies for about 100 years. We've only had TV for about 60. We've only had phones for about 10 in the way that we're using them now to view like content. But we have had theater for thousands of years. And I'm not breaking the mold by saying that. I just think that it really speaks to something that is deeply human. I had the experience of putting my show on in February of 2020. I put my show on live at the very end of February. The world shut down on account of COVID within 2 weeks. And then in May of 2020, I did a completely digital performance. I performed in an empty theater into a camera to be broadcast to people's laptops and TVs around the country. I technically still did the same show. I said all the same words. I delivered everything more or less the exact same, but it could not have been a more different experience than having and feeling an audience there. I honestly think that if COVID did nothing but teach all of us how precious one another's company is. It is so precious to be in the presence of another human being, whether it be in person. I think now we have all learned to conduct ourselves, over Zoom. We're all fairly used to this at this point. And we're all much better at it than we were when the pandemic started. I cringe at how clumsily I handled like job interviews or, happy hour game nights over Zoom. But now I am so grateful for the opportunity to physically be with other people. And whether I'm watching a show, experiencing the tangible tension of like, this is live, this is happening right now. There's no editing, there's no cutting away. There's nothing is going to remove me from this experience. I am fully pulled in. And as a performer, that is such an enticing challenge to me of like the audience cannot click away and they cannot swipe. They cannot swipe to the next thing. It's just me. And I have to keep them engaged and interested. And that has maybe never been harder in history, but it's so satisfying as an audience member and as a performer when you're actually able to do it, I think. So that's a very roundabout way of answering that question. But I think live storytelling, it goes back to us being around campfires and in caves. It goes back to us communicating the deepest part of who we are. And I think there's something innately uncomfortable about it, but that discomfort is not bad. That discomfort is exciting. The reason I love solo theater goes back to my inspiration in getting into theater in the first place. So I will say that in regards to the subject of my show has a lot to do with my very conservative evangelical upbringing. I was raised incredibly fundamentalist Christian, and I'm happy to get into that more. But one thing that I did not realize about that upbringing until I was quite a bit older was that I had the benefit pretty much every single Sunday of watching somebody get on stage and perform some kind of show, whether they were delivering a story about their life, or they were delivering some kind of message that had a point, or they were trying to achieve some kind of objective. My dad was a missionary, so quite frequently his objective was to tell a story on stage that was so moving and so captivating, the audience felt compelled to donate money so that we could continue doing missions work. That's like a very formula-driven kind of marketed. It's almost like a marketing formula. But I was really fortunate to watch people do it with very sincere heart and conviction. It never really felt like it was put on. But as I got older, I realized how much of it really is a craft. So watching a pastor get on stage and just talk for 30 to 45 minutes, giving their life story. And I always remembered the funny ones. I remembered the dramatic ones. I remember the ones with jokes that were peppered through. I remembered when somebody told a crazy story about their childhood or told a wild story about a conversion experience. That really stuck with me in a way that the guy just reading from the Bible and telling me how to live my life, that never stuck with me. That never resonated. So in a way, I think as solo theater sometimes reminds me of that dynamic where you want to connect with an audience in a really honest way. Particularly the kind of solo theater I do is direct address. I don't use a fourth wall. Well, not yet. I haven't. But I speak directly to the audience because I'm influenced by live comedy. So in doing that, there is a challenge of needing to keep them connected. It's almost akin to having a conversation with them. They're just waiting a really, really long time to talk. And I have to make it very, very worth their time to sit and listen. But hopefully, if I've done my job right, when I'm done talking, they have plenty of responses. They have plenty of things to say back. So I can't really speak on behalf of solo theater where there is not a fourth wall, where you are in a conceptualized world and you are playing every single character and the audience is not there. In some respect, that feels absolutely terrifying to me because I would much rather address the audience-shaped elephant in the room. Because I've never done that, I don't know if that would be harder than doing a conventional play, but I can say that I did a conventional play in college one time. Well, I did Enemy of the People. It just occurred to me that that was a very well-known play that plenty of people would have heard of. I did Enemy of the People, and I played the character of can't remember his name, but the character of the sea captain, who has all of like 7 lines, but he's on stage a lot. So I spent most of that show sitting and listening. I didn't really like have to do a whole lot. I just had to believably sit there and listen. When you're the only one on stage, even if you are sitting and listening, you have to be doing something interesting enough to be compelling the audience through like what you're doing. And it's all on you. There is no rest. There's no break. There's no going backstage to get a sip of water or collect yourself. You have to really, really be present and in the moment. And doing solo theater is more exhausting than anything I've ever done in a conventional show. But it's also a completely different experience whatsoever. And I think conventional theater, if I miss anything of conventional theater, it's the creative collaboration of there are times where you are genuinely sitting and listening to another character and having to be truly in that scene and be a different person. That is a unique challenge that I have not experienced in solo theater in the same way. There's so many different kinds of solo theater too. I mean, solo theater can either, well, there's versions where you are just playing every character. There is a fourth wall. You don't break the fourth wall. And you do have to be so convincingly good that the audience suspends their disbelief. It takes so much craft and skill to help the audience suspend their disbelief. As a direct address performer who, frequently in the show, I will address the audience and then I will go into a scene. So my show is written in vignettes. So I directly address the audience and then I go into a scene where I'm maybe having a conversation. Then I'm back out to the audience. So I'm giving the audience and myself these moments of reprieve. I'm giving both of us kind of like a break. And I think of it a little bit like when you're in a conversation with somebody right in front of you, you don't just stare at them like unblinkingly. You kind of like look away for a second. You consider your thought and then you come back and then you're considering this and, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I'm listening. That's really cool. Okay. So then you kind of like are giving yourself and them mental moments to catch themselves. And I feel like in really, really great non-fourth wall breaking theater, you are taking all of the weight off of the audience. They are not obligated to engage with you at all. You are trusting that they will, but that is inherently scary to me personally. I had the idea for a concept called Missionary Positions for a long time, which I originally had only conceived of as a book. I had planned on writing a memoir about my life as a evangelical missionary kid. I knew in talking to people throughout my experience, I'll go back quickly and I'll say this. When I started doing stand-up, I had a number of experiences when I was really young, when I was in my early 20s, where I would get on stage and I would tell jokes about different parts of my life, or I would make jokes about being really big or really tall or whatever. And I would make all these jokes. And then I would go have conversations with people and I would start talking to them about my upbringing. And every once in a while, somebody would be like, why don't you talk about this? And I was just like, oh, I don't know. I didn't think it was interesting to other people. But I think the truth is I just didn't know how to talk about it. When I was in my early 20s, I didn't have the taste or the craft or the sense of self, the sense of confidence to confidently approach my own story with any kind of artistic point of view. That took time to develop as I performed in other ways over the course of my 20s. Like a lot of people in their late 20s, the thing that forced me to write the show, I think, was ultimately an existential crisis. I had been pursuing fairly traditional acting in Los Angeles for a long time as a commercial actor. I'd done a number of independent projects, indie films, web series, but I really was not gaining any kind of traction as a performer. And I was very quickly losing passion and steam for continuing to be an actor. Despite the encouragement and love of a lot of really good friends and other creative people that I admired and respected, I was just very quickly losing hope in myself being able to make any kind of artistic life for myself. I decided to leave my agency and stop acting when I was about 29 years old, which I believe was the right decision. And it also left me with this point of like, well, what am I going to do now? What am I going to do with my life? Because I'm a bartender and I'm 29. So there's quite possibly a lot of years left to live, and I don't know what to do with them. And this idea of writing this memoir, Missionary Positions, kind of returned to me and was like, well, maybe you should really give writing a try. You've never really tried to be a writer. And honestly, I made a post. I made a joking post on social media about, I'm going to start writing my tell-all memoir about my missionary upbringing, Missionary Positions. And my now director commented underneath it and said, you should consider doing this as a show. And it was really that comment that was like, oh, yeah, I guess that's allowed. I guess I don't need anybody to hire me to do that. And it would be way shorter than writing a book. So, okay. And I met with her and I started talking to her and developing the process with her. And it very naturally started to grow out of that. Once I started watering the idea of like, Missionary Positions is a solo show, it took root and started to grow naturally. Missionary Positions is my autobiographical story. My name is Dan. I'm a recovering evangelical. I was born to parents who were already committed to become Christian missionaries. Very quickly after I was born, we moved to Bangkok, Thailand. We then lived in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. We lived in Bucharest, Romania for a time in my high school years. And I lived in America for a few years in there just to keep me relatable. The subject of the show has mostly to do with fundamentalist religiosity, fundamentalist Christianity, and the effects that that can have on a young life. The subtitle of the show is Missionary Positions, a recovering Christian's guide to getting lost, because I was raised with such a strong distinction between people being saved or people being lost. And the show is really about my personal discovery and my moving away from fundamentalist religion and away from conservative evangelicalism, away from Christianity as I knew it at all, and becoming lost. And in becoming lost, ultimately finding a sense of freedom and spiritual depth beyond anything that had ever been presented to me while I was strictly Christian. What do I want the audience to get out of the play? My hope is that my audience will leave Missionary Positions feeling a broader sense of hope, a broader sense of peace, that no matter where they are in life, they are not lost, and they are perhaps exactly where they need to be. I want them to leave with a sense of community and with a sense that no matter what they're going through, they're not going through it alone. I want people to leave talking about certain more controversial themes in the show, and I want people to leave repeating the jokes that they liked the best. I think the thing that will surprise the audience the most is that while I certainly pull no punches in regards to the evangelical church as I knew it growing up, and I am a lover of really, really letting conservative American Christianity have it, and I really have no qualms about offending that particular tribe, because that is the tribe that raised me. So I feel that is my birthright. But I think the thing that will surprise the audience the most is that it is not a hateful, angry show. And I do not intend to leave anybody with a notion of rage or indignation or a desire for vengeance. I think the most surprising thing about it is that I am authentically somebody who believes that I did get well and truly lost. I'm a backslider. I have fallen away from the Christianity I was raised with. Many of my peers from my childhood would not consider me a Christian, but I still have a very, very open, spiritual, and frankly, theological orthodoxy that allows me to engage with the world as a spiritual person in a very, very open and honest way. People should go to my play because I think it's going to be unlike anything else there. I think the subject matter is going to be fairly unique. I think the way that I tackle it is fairly unique. And because I think it's a really, really interesting, unique, and often hilarious and heartbreaking show. I think it encompasses a wide range of human emotions that, regardless of upbringing or spiritual inclination, it can be related to by pretty much anybody. And I think there's something in it for everybody. And I think there are things that people will find funny no matter what. I think that ultimately it's an engaging show that will leave people asking questions as they drive home. My hopes and dreams for this production are far and wide. Of course, I feel like I have all of the stereotypical hopes and dreams, but my very, very tangible hope and dream for this show is I would love to do a tour of Missionary Positions through a pretty good portion of the American Bible Belt. I would love to take this show to the Midwest, to the South, to the parts of the country where I have lived and where so many of my friends have lived or still live, where evangelical Christianity is still such a prominent spirituality, and honestly, probably always will be. And the show is not about dissolving that or destroying that. My hope is that I can bring the show to other people like me who were disillusioned and broken and hurting, and offer a little bit of encouragement and a little bit of inspiration and maybe a fun, entertaining night of theater that leaves them saying, I'm going to be okay. It's going to be okay. We're all going to be okay. My name is Dan Prevette, and my show is Missionary Positions, a recovering Christian's guide to getting lost. You can find all tickets at dandoeswords.com/show. Your soul is fine. Save your seat.